The town square shimmered under a bright noon sun, the fair alive with color and chatter, the scent of baked pies, polished leather, and summer flowers blending in the air. Clara Reeves walked carefully across the open square, a basket of hand-sewn dresses balanced against her hip, the hem of her own gown brushing polished boots that didn't belong to her. It was her first fair since her husband's passing, and she'd told herself she was ready to face people again, ready to stand tall. But the world had a way of testing courage at the worst moment. When she reached the mayor's wife's stall, her heel caught on a bent nail hidden in the wooden stage. The sound of tearing fabric was sharp and cruel, slicing through laughter and fiddle music like a blade. For one breathless instant, the world froze. Then came the whispers. Then came the laughter. "Well, look at that," someone said. "Seamstress can't even keep her own dress together." The sound grew, rippling outward, until it felt like the entire fair was laughing. Clara stood motionless, her face burning as she clutched the torn fabric near her thigh, fingers trembling. Her basket toppled, dresses spilling like fallen petals into the dirt. She bent to gather them, but her hands shook too much. No one helped. Not the women she'd sewn for, not the men she'd greeted each Sunday. Just stares, some mocking, some pitying, all heavy. Her breath caught, shame tightening around her like a corset. She wanted to disappear. Then, from somewhere beyond the circle of laughter, a voice spoke, steady, low, and kind. "Ma'am." The tone silenced them faster than thunder. The crowd parted as Elias Boone stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled high on his forearms, the faint sheen of work still on his skin. His face carried that calm strength of a man who'd lived long enough to know what cruelty cost. He didn't look at the tear. He looked at her eyes. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders, his movement slow and deliberate, as if dignity itself could be handed back. The fabric was warm, smelling faintly of cedar and sun. "Dignity's still yours," he said quietly. The laughter died. One of the men near the stall coughed and turned away. Another muttered something under his breath and disappeared. Clara stood there, stunned, clutching the coat closed with both hands. "You don't have to," she started, voice trembling. "I know," he said, and that was all. He knelt to pick up the scattered dresses, dusted them gently, folded them and placed them back in her basket. His hands were steady, work-worn, careful. When he rose, he met her gaze again. "Walk with me?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. The crowd moved aside as they crossed the square together, her head held just high enough to show she hadn't been broken. A child watching nearby whispered, "Mama, why'd he give her his coat?" The woman replied softly, "Because some men still remember how to be decent." When they reached her wagon, Clara turned to him, the coat still around her. "I'll have it washed and returned tomorrow," she said, voice small but steady. Elias nodded once, eyes kind. "No hurry, it's doing its job." He tipped his hat, turned, and walked away through the golden light, leaving her with the faint scent of cedar. A half-healed heart, and the strange realization that kindness, when seen in daylight, could quiet even the cruelest laughter. By morning the fair was gone, but its laughter lingered like smoke. Clara could hear it in every polite silence when she passed a neighbor, in the too long stares from women who smiled only after she looked away. The coat still hung over her chair, heavy and warm, its folds smelling faintly of cedar and sun. She'd tried to fold it and put it away, but something in her refused, because it wasn't just a coat anymore. It was proof that someone, somewhere, had stood up when everyone else stepped back. She touched the edge of the fabric as she poured water into a basin, the cold splash breaking her thoughts. She had work to finish, repairs, orders to fill, but her hands moved slower than usual. Every stitch reminded her of the sound of tearing fabric, that sharp humiliation she couldn't quite shake. By afternoon, the sky grew pale with heat, and the sound of hooves broke the stillness. She stepped to the door, expecting the milk wagon, but there he was, Elias Boone, reins slack, eyes steady, dismounting before she could find words. He looked the same as before. Simple shirt, sleeves rolled, the kind of man who carried calm like a second skin. "You left this behind," she said, holding out the coat. "Didn't leave it," he answered. "Just lent it." "You've got a strange way of lending things," she said, half smiling despite herself. "Maybe," he said, "but it fits you better than it ever fit me." She wanted to argue, but couldn't. Instead, she folded it carefully and handed it back. "I washed it," she said. "It's cleaner now." "Didn't need clean," he said quietly. "Needed to do its job." She opened her mouth to thank him, but the word caught in her throat. He didn't seem to notice. His gaze drifted past her to the small table where unfinished dresses lay waiting. "You do all that alone?" "Always have," she said. "Ain't it heavy?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but lighter than depending on someone who'll drop it halfway." He nodded, understanding more than she'd meant to say. "World's full of folks that carry shame that ain't theirs," he said. "You don't look like one of 'em." The words hit deeper than she expected. "You don't know me," she said softly. "Maybe not," he said, "but I know what it looks like when someone stands back up after the world tries to push 'em down." She looked at him then, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the faint scar near his jaw, the quiet steadiness that didn't need to be explained. "You think I'll stand back up?" she asked. "Reckon you already have," he said, tipping his hat. He started to turn, then stopped. "Town's still talking," he said, "but talk runs out faster than truth. Don't let it eat you." "I won't," she said, though part of her knew it already had. When he rode off, the coat felt heavier in her hands. She set it on the chair again, its weight oddly comforting. That evening, as she lit the lamp, a knock came at the door. When she opened it, a small folded note lay on the step, pinned beneath a button from her torn dress. It wasn't signed, but she didn't need a name. The words were simple. "Keep it till you forget why you needed it." She read it twice, then hung the coat by the door, not as a memory of shame, but as a promise that maybe, somewhere in this land, kindness could still outlive cruelty. The next morning dawned pale and clear, the kind of light that made even the simplest things look honest. Clara stood by her mirror, brushing her hair with deliberate care, every stroke a quiet decision. On the chair beside her hung the coat, folded neatly at first, now draped over her arm as if it had been waiting for this very morning. She'd thought about leaving it behind, about letting silence do the work of dignity. But the truth was simpler. She needed to face them. Not for revenge, not even for pride, but because hiding meant the laughter still owned her. When she stepped onto the street, the world turned to look. Conversations faltered. The same men who had chuckled behind their hats pretended now to study the sky. The women at the bakery counter whispered behind lace gloves. She didn't hurry. The coat, heavy across her shoulders, felt like armor sewn from someone else's faith. A child near the steps pointed and said, "That's the lady from the fair." His mother hushed him, but Clara smiled anyway. "Yes," she said softly. "That's me." The words came out steadier than she expected. She kept walking, past the blacksmith, past the feed store, straight to the tailor's shop, the one place she'd been avoiding. Mr. Harper, the owner, glanced up as she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Mrs. Reeves," he said cautiously. "Didn't think we'd see you so soon." "Needed thread," she said simply, setting her basket on the counter. "Same kind you sold me last week, the strong one." He hesitated, then handed it over. "You holding up?" She looked him in the eye. "Better than my dress that day." He chuckled nervously, unsure whether she was joking. When she turned to leave, a voice outside stopped her. "Mrs. Reeves?" It was the mayor's wife, the same woman whose order she'd been delivering when the tear happened. She looked awkward, clutching a parasol like a shield. "About the fair," she began. "I meant to thank you for your work. The dress was beautiful." "It tore," Clara said. "Only because the stage wasn't finished," the woman replied quickly, eyes darting away. "My husband said he'd fix it." Clara nodded once. "Good." The woman hesitated, then added, "You've handled this admirably." "Didn't have much choice," Clara said. "There's always a choice," the woman murmured, though her tone carried more regret than advice. When she left, the silence that followed felt lighter. Clara stepped back into the sunlight, her basket full of new thread, her head unbowed. At the edge of the square, a familiar figure stood by the hitching post, Elias Boone, watching quietly, one hand resting on his horse's reins. "You came back," he said as she approached. "Didn't know I left," she answered. His smile was small but certain. "Town's quieter today," he said. "You do that?" "Maybe the coat did," she said. "Seems to speak louder than I can." "Then keep letting it talk," he said. "Some truths need time to echo." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in linen. "Flour," he said. "Figured you'd make better use of it than I would." "You didn't have to?" "Didn't say I had to," he said. "Said I wanted to." She took it carefully, her fingers brushing his for half a heartbeat too long. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "World's still watchin'." "Then let it watch," she replied. And as she walked home, the coat trailing slightly in the breeze, she realized something simple but profound. Dignity wasn't something people gave back. It was something you learned to keep, no matter who tried to take it. 2 days later, the sound of a hammer tapping drifted through Clara's window, steady and familiar. She stepped outside, brushing flour from her hands, to find Elias Boone bent over a new signpost he'd set beside her gate. The plank was plain pine, the letters carved carefully by hand. Reeves and Repairs. He looked up when she approached, that quiet half-smile forming before he even spoke. "Seemed your work needed a name," he said. "You shouldn't have," she replied, though her voice softened at the edges. "Maybe not," he said, "but I've learned sometimes folks respect what they can read." She traced the carved letters with her fingertips, the fresh wood smooth beneath her touch. "You carved this yourself?" "Didn't trust my handwriting," he said, setting the hammer down. "Thought a sign might keep the wrong kind of talk away." She smiled faintly. "Or start new talk." "If it does," he said, "let it be about work that lasts." He followed her inside, removing his hat politely, eyes scanning the small room filled with fabric, thread, and color. "You built all this by hand?" he asked. "Every stitch," she said. "Some nights I think the walls are held up by thread instead of nails." He chuckled. "Could be stronger that way." She moved to the table, where a torn waistcoat waited to be mended. "You ever sew?" she asked. "Can tie a rope," he said. "Close enough." She motioned for him to sit, handing him a needle threaded with soft gray string. "Then let's see." He took it awkwardly, squinting at the thread like it was a puzzle meant to humble him. "Feels too small for my hands," he muttered. "Most delicate things do," she said gently, "but they're the ones that hold the world together." His first stitch was crooked. The second, worse. She laughed quietly, the sound light and unguarded. "You're terrible at this." "So far," he said. "You were worse at milking, if I recall." "Fair," she said, smiling. She leaned closer to guide his hand, her fingers brushing his. The motion slowed as he found the rhythm. Needle through, pull, breathe. Their shoulders nearly touched, the quiet between them filled only by the sound of thread whispering through fabric. "Not bad," she said after a while. "You'd make a decent apprentice?" "Don't tempt me," he said. "Might take the offer." "And who'd mend your fences then?" "Guess I'd find time for both." He looked at her then, and for a moment the air in the small room seemed to still, thick with something that wasn't quite spoken. She looked away first, pretending to inspect his work. "That'll do," she said softly. "For a man who claims he can't sew, you held the line." He smiled. "Ain't that the trick?" He stood, setting the vest aside. "I'll send some folks your way. Word travels fast when it's honest." "And when it's not?" she asked. "Then we talk louder," he said. He tipped his hat, started for the door, then turned back. "You keep that coat by the door?" "Every day," she said. "Still does its job." "Good," he said, his voice like quiet thunder. "Means the world's learning." She watched him leave, the sign outside catching the light. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel far away. It felt like something she could sew one careful stitch at a time. By the next week, the rhythm of the town had shifted. Where once eyes followed Clara with smirks, now they lingered with a kind of quiet respect. Her shop bell rang more often. Women brought in torn hems. Men asked her to patch work shirts, and a few even left payment without being asked. The sign Elias had carved gleamed in the morning sun, simple and proud, its letters steady as if they'd always belonged there. Yet, as often happens in places where gossip once thrived, one cruel voice was all it took to remind her how fragile peace could be. It happened at the mercantile. Clara stood at the counter trading fabric when she heard it. Two women whispering near the spice shelf. "She's done well for a widow," one said. "Too well, maybe. You think she'd sew that fast if the rancher weren't paying in something other than coin?" The words hit like a slap. Clara turned, heart pounding, every memory of the fair flashing back. The laughter, the shame, the tearing sound she'd tried to forget. The women saw her watching but didn't stop. One even smiled, sweet as vinegar. "Morning, Mrs. Reeves," she said lightly. Clara's hand clenched around the spool of thread she was holding, but her voice came out calm. "Morning." She paid for her fabric, lifted her basket, and walked out without another word. But by the time she reached the corner, her breath had turned shaky. She leaned against a post, blinking fast, willing herself not to cry. Then she saw him, Elias, crossing the street with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder, dust on his boots, and the same unhurried stride that made the world seem less cruel. "You all right?" he asked, reading her face before she could speak. "They're talking again," she said quietly. "Can't seem to help themselves." "They will," he said, "when they've got nothing left to invent." "I thought I stopped caring," she said. "Guess I was wrong." He set the rope down and stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You ever seen a torn thread?" "Plenty," she said. "What do you do with it?" "Cut it off, tie another, keep sewing." Then do that, he said. You can't keep what's already unraveled. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You make it sound easy. Ain't easy, he said. Just right. He picked up her basket, carrying it as they walked down the street together, the weight of silence around them gentler now. People looked. But something in his presence, steady, unashamed, made their gazes drop. When they reached her shop, he set the basket down on the table inside. Don't let 'em shrink you, he said. They'll try. Every time you stand taller, someone's bound to trip on their own envy. She smiled faintly. You always got a sermon ready? Just the ones I need to hear myself, he said, his eyes softening. If you ever forget who you are, read that sign out front. I carved it deep so time wouldn't wear it down. And what about you? She asked. Who carves yours? He paused, then said quietly, You do. Every time you stand back up. She looked away, pretending to straighten the fabric on the table, but the corners of her eyes betrayed her. Guess we're both still learning, she said. Best kind of lesson, he replied, tipping his hat as he left. When the door closed, Clara touched the letters of her sign again and whispered, Then I'll keep teaching. By the week's end, clouds had gathered low over the valley, rolling in from the mountains like a slow gray tide. The wind began before dawn, tugging at the shutters of Clara's shop and carrying the smell of rain and pine through the open cracks. She moved quickly, pulling her fabrics from the windows, tying the curtains tight, but the storm came faster than she expected. The first thunderclap shook the panes. By afternoon, the path to town had turned to mud, and the creek near her fence swelled high and restless. She had just finished stacking the last of her sewing inside when the sound of hooves rose above the rain. For a heartbeat, she thought it was her mind playing tricks. Then came the knock. 2 firm raps, steady and certain. She opened the door to find Elias Boone standing in the rain, soaked through. His hair darkened and his shirt plastered to his shoulders. His hat dripped water down his neck, and yet he looked calm, the same way he had the day they met. Thought I'd make sure your roof was holding, he said simply. It's holding, she said, stepping aside. Barely. He ducked inside, water puddling at his boots. Wind took a tree across my road, he said. Figured I'd wait it out here. You're welcome, she said, handing him a towel. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, and for a moment neither spoke. The lamp on the table flickered as the storm pressed against the walls. Ain't much light left, he said quietly. Then we'll share what's left, she answered. He smiled faintly, pulling the chair closer to the small stove. You always talk like that? Like what? Like every sentence means more than it says. Only when it needs to, she said. He chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed him one. Tastes like courage, he said after a sip. Or burnt beans, she replied, smiling. The wind howled outside, rattling the window frame. You scared of storms? He asked. Used to be, she said. Now I think they just tell the truth louder than we do. He looked at her then. Really looked, the lamplight catching the calm in her eyes. You ever get tired of holding strong? He asked. Sometimes, she admitted. But it's the only way I know how to stay upright. You ain't the only one, he said. His voice carried something different now. Not pity, but honesty. As if the storm had stripped away whatever distance they'd kept. She saw the lines in his face soften. You ever lose someone? She asked. Everyone loses someone, he said. But I lost the kind I didn't think I could live without. Your wife? He nodded once. Long time ago. Been building fences ever since, like that'd keep the ache out. It doesn't, she said quietly. No, he agreed. But it keeps the wind off. Another thunderclap shook the walls. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding his. Then maybe it's time someone built one for you, she said. He looked at her, rain still glistening on his jaw, eyes steady but vulnerable. Guess that's what I came here for, he said softly. They sat like that until the fire dimmed, the storm outside softening into silence. And when he finally leaned back, exhausted and calm, she covered him with the same coat he'd once given her, its weight now a shared story, not a borrowed kindness. When morning came, the storm had spent itself. The air was washed clean, the sky a pale silver that made every leaf and fence post shine like it had been forgiven. Clara stepped outside barefoot, the ground cool beneath her feet, her dress hem damp from the night's rain. Behind her, Elias stood at the doorway, hat in hand, his shirt sleeves rolled, his voice roughened by sleep but gentle as ever. Roof held fine, he said. Told you it would, she replied. He smiled, that slow, quiet curve that never seemed to need words to finish it. The world felt different now, not just lighter, but honest. For the first time since the fair, she wasn't afraid of being seen. They walked together toward the fence line, the air still carrying the scent of wet pine. In town, smoke was rising from chimneys, and the sound of wagon wheels echoed faintly through the valley. They'll talk, she said, not as fear but as fact. They already do, he answered. But today, they'll be talking about the woman who kept her roof when theirs leaked. She laughed softly. You always know what to say. Just learn to stop saying the wrong things, he said, eyes glinting. She glanced toward the horizon, where sunlight broke through the clouds in thin golden lines. It's strange, she murmured. I used to think storms came to tear things apart. Now I think they just show you what was built strong enough to stay. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind that holds more gratitude than speech. You built something strong here, Clara. Even the weather knows better than to take it. She smiled, but shook her head. I didn't build it alone. He turned then, reaching for the fence rail, testing the post's strength. You ever think about moving closer to town? He asked. Thought about it, she said. But I like it here. No one to tell me what I can't do. Then I'll make sure the road stays clear, he said. Seems I keep ending up here anyway. Maybe that's not an accident, she said. His gaze lingered on her, and she felt it. Not heavy, but certain, like a promise wrapped in quiet. Maybe not, he said finally. A horse neighed in the distance, the sound of life starting again after the storm. She turned back toward the cabin, where the coat hung drying on a wooden peg near the door, the same one that had once saved her from humiliation. It no longer looked borrowed. It looked like it belonged there, part of the house, part of her. She ran her hand along the sleeve as she passed it. Feeling the warmth of fabric touched by two storms, one from the sky, one from life. Elias followed her inside, pausing by the doorway. You know, he said, you never gave me that coat back. You never asked for it, she replied. Didn't have to, he said. It found its home. She looked up at him then, the silence stretching between them soft and certain. So did you, she whispered. He didn't answer, but the way his hand brushed the doorframe said everything. Outside, the puddles caught sunlight like bits of glass, and for the first time in months, the world didn't look divided between laughter and shame. It looked whole, like maybe kindness had finally taken root deep enough to stay. By Sunday, word had spread that Clara Reeves would be bringing her repaired dresses to the church square. Same as before. Same place where laughter once turned cruel. The morning air shimmered with that clean brightness only found after rain, and even the bell seemed to ring softer. Clara arrived early, basket on her arm, the hem of her blue dress brushing the freshly swept boards of the stall. The coat, his coat, was folded neatly over her arm, not as armor this time, but as something that had earned its peace. Across the square, people watched her set up. No one whispered now. Even those who had mocked her before seemed unsure how to meet her gaze. She felt their eyes, but didn't flinch. Every motion was deliberate. The unfolding of cloth, the pinning of hems, the way she laid out the finished work as if it were an offering of silence. A few women approached first, pretending to examine her stitching. "You still doing custom work?" one asked, her tone almost apologetic. "Always," Clara said evenly. "Strong seams last longer than rumors." The woman smiled awkwardly, dropped a coin, and walked off. By mid-morning, the crowd thickened. The mayor's wife came too, wearing one of Clara's repaired dresses, and nodded in public for the first time. It was a small thing, but the town noticed. Then came Elias. He dismounted at the far end of the square, his presence quiet but impossible to miss. Broad shoulders, open collar, the kind of calm that steadied everything around him. He walked through the crowd, stopping beside Clara's stall. "Brought something for you," he said, setting a wrapped bundle on the table. When she unfolded it, her breath caught. Inside lay a new sign carved from oak, the letters deep and certain. Reeves and Boone. Honest work, honest hands. "You didn't ask?" he said softly. "Didn't have to," she replied. "I knew what you'd say." "Then you'll keep it?" "It's already ours," she said. The square grew quiet. People turned, watching the two of them standing there, not as scandal, not as gossip, but as something unshakable. A young boy whispered to his father, "Is he your husband?" The man replied, "Not yet, but maybe that's better. Some things are built before they're named." Elias took off his hat, looking at her with that same respectful ease he'd had the first day. "Town's watching again," he said under his breath. "Let them," she answered. "They might learn something this time." He smiled, placed his hat back on, and began helping her fold the dresses, his large hands careful not to crease the fabric. "You think they'll ever stop talking?" she asked. "When they find better stories," he said. "Till then, we give 'em ones worth rememberin'." She laughed quietly, sunlight catching the corners of her hair. A little girl ran up and tugged her sleeve. "Miss Clara," she said, "Mama says you make dresses that don't tear." Clara knelt, smiling. "Only if you promise to be kind to the ones who wear them." "I will," the child said solemnly, and ran back to her mother. Elias looked down at Clara, his expression soft, almost reverent. "You fixed more than dresses here," he said. "You fixed something in folks they didn't even know was broken." She met his eyes, her heart steady now. "Maybe that's what the coat was meant for all along," she said. "Not to hide me, just to remind them." He nodded, voice low. Then it did its job. And as the sun climbed higher, the sign behind them caught the light. Two names carved side by side, both built from the same truth. Some things can't be torn once they've been sewn together right. That evening, long after the fairgrounds had emptied and the last wagon wheels had faded down the road, Clara found herself sitting on the porch steps, the new sign gleaming faintly in the lamplight. The coat rested across her lap, its fabric soft from use, the stitches along its lining worn but unbroken. She traced them with her fingers, wondering who had sewn them first. When Elias's footsteps approached, she didn't turn. She just said, You never told me where it came from." He paused, the boards creaking under his weight. "Didn't think it mattered," he said. "It does now." He sat beside her, elbows on his knees, the night around them filled with crickets and the smell of pine. "Belonged to my wife," he said finally. "She made it for me the first winter we came west. Said a man should have something warm enough to face the cold and kind enough to share if someone needed it more." Clara's breath caught. "And you shared it with me." He nodded slowly. "When she passed, I put it away. Couldn't stand to look at it. Felt like I was wearing a ghost." "But you gave it to me," she whispered. "You weren't the first person I wanted to give it to," he said, voice steady but low. "You were the first one who needed it the way she meant it to be used." The words sat between them like an ember, quiet but alive. "So it wasn't just a coat," she said softly. "No," he said. "It was her way of reminding me that decency don't die just because someone you love does." She looked down at the fabric again, the seams she'd reinforced, the places where his wife's thread met hers. "Then maybe she's still doing her work," Clara said. "Maybe she always was." He smiled faintly, a tired but genuine thing. "Reckon she'd like you," he said. "You both got the same way of looking at the world, like it's breakable but still worth fixing." "Maybe that's why it keeps coming to me torn," Clara said, laughing softly through her breath. He reached over then, fingers brushing hers, rough and careful. "You ever wonder why I was at that fair?" he asked. "Figured you just needed something to fix," she said. "Maybe I did," he admitted. "But it wasn't a fence or a tool. It was something in me that had been quiet too long. Watching you that day, standing there, not running, not hiding, felt like seeing Courage again for the first time since she left." She looked at him, eyes bright in the lamplight. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I think Courage looks like you wearing that coat and still choosing to smile." The porch went still, the kind of stillness that carries no awkwardness, only understanding. "Maybe it's time you took it back," she said, folding it carefully toward him. He shook his head. "It found its place, and so did I." She hesitated, then pressed it against his chest anyway, just for a moment. "Then we'll share it," she said. He met her gaze, a rare light in his eyes. "That sounds fair." The night deepened around them, soft and blue, the lamp between them flickering as if it understood. Above, the stars began to show, quiet witnesses to a promise that needed no words. That kindness, once given honestly, never really belonged to just one person. Again. The morning came soft and golden, the kind of light that turned ordinary moments into something that felt like memory before it even ended. Clara woke early, the smell of bread rising from the oven, the faint creak of the porch as Elias moved outside, checking the fence he'd mended the night before. Everything around her carried the quiet rhythm of belonging. The kettle's hum, the curtains breathing in the morning breeze, the way the new sign caught the sunlight like a promise carved in oak. She stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, and saw the coat hanging on the rail where he'd left it. It swayed gently in the breeze, its fabric glowing amber in the light. She smiled, touching it as she passed, remembering every moment it had seen, the laughter that broke her, the silence that healed her, the rain that bound them. Elias turned when he heard her. "Smells like home," he said, voice easy, warm. "You say that every morning," she teased. "Then I mean it every morning," he replied. He leaned on the post, hat low, sunlight glancing off his jaw. "Town's been quiet lately," he said. "Feels strange." "Maybe peace always feels strange at first," she said. He nodded thoughtfully. Some folks came by yesterday. Wanted to know if you'd take apprentices. She laughed. I'm still learning myself. That's why you'd be good at teaching, he said. You remember what it costs. She looked out at the fields, the horizon stretching endless and forgiving. Maybe that's the point, she said softly. To teach what kindness can build when no one's looking. A pause settled between them, comfortable, deep. Then he said, You ever think about what comes next? She met his eyes, the morning reflected there like the start of something steady. I used to think next meant starting over. Now I think it just means keeping on. He smiled at that, slow and certain. Then let's keep on. He turned toward the barn, and she watched him go, the air filled with the soft sound of birds and wind through open fields. Inside, she placed 2 plates on the table, poured the coffee, and laid the coat over the back of his chair. It didn't feel borrowed or even gifted. It felt earned, woven from every act of decency that had survived the cruelty of the world. When he came in, brushing the dust from his hands, he paused by the doorway. You hung it here, he said quietly. It belongs here, she replied. Right between your work and mine. He studied her for a long moment, the kind that made silence feel like a language all its own. You sure? I've never been surer of anything, she said. He stepped closer, resting a hand on the chair back beside hers. Then I reckon it's settled, he said. We'll let it stay. She smiled. Not just the coat. He chuckled, the sound low and certain. Didn't think you meant just that. Outside, the sun climbed higher, the last of the morning mist fading into the open air. For the first time in a long while, the world felt whole again. Not perfect, but real, made of stitched hearts and second chances. And as the wind caught the edge of the coat, lifting it slightly like a flag of something quietly won, Clara whispered to herself, Some things aren't meant to be returned. They're meant to stay and remind you who you are. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. If you saw her standing there, torn dress, trembling hands, the world laughing, would you have stepped forward too?